My name is Robert, and on October 31st, 2008, I died. Or rather, I almost died. What happened to me that day and over the 15 days that followed completely changed my perception of life, death, and everything that exists between these two states. Today, more than a decade later, I've decided to share my story. Not to convince anyone of anything, not to impose a religious or scientific view, but simply to report what I saw, what I felt, and what I learned when I crossed the boundary between this world and another place. If you're watching this video, perhaps it's because you've experienced something similar or you know someone who has. Maybe you're just curious about what happens when we die. Or perhaps, like me before that day, you simply don't believe there's anything beyond this physical reality. I understand. I used to be that way too. Everything started in the most ordinary way possible. It was a sunny Friday afternoon, and my wife and I were beginning a peaceful trip to the coast, along with my father-in-law. Nothing extraordinary, just a weekend with family, something we did frequently. I was 40 years old at the time, in good shape with no apparent health problems. I worked in Sao Paulo, led a normal life, typical of any professional in the city. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that my life was about to change forever. We stopped on Bandeirantes Avenue to get some water before hitting the road. My wife was driving. When I got out of the car, something bizarre happened. It was as if the world around me began to distance itself. My father-in-law, who was standing in front of me, suddenly seemed to be miles away, as if I were seeing him through a tunnel that was infinitely elongating. The edges of my vision started to darken, and everything around me seemed to be moving in slow motion. My legs lost all their strength. Each step was a monumental effort. I felt like I was wading through thick water, my movements heavy and labored. With great difficulty, I managed to reach him and warn him through gritted teeth. "Look, something's happening to me. Something's very wrong." We stopped. We drank some water. And then it started, the pain. Chest pain like I'd never experienced before. Intense, sharp, absolutely unbearable pain. It felt like someone had plunged a burning knife into my chest and was twisting it, opening me from the inside. The pain was so overwhelming that I couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. I doubled over, clutching my chest, screaming without caring who heard me. "We need to stop the trip," I managed to say between gasps, my voice barely recognizable. "I need to go to the hospital. Now." My father-in-law decided to continue on his journey to the coast, and my wife immediately turned the car around to take me to the nearest hospital. But this was Sao Paulo on a Friday afternoon. The traffic was notorious. We were stuck, barely moving, crawling forward at an agonizing pace, and with each passing minute, the pain intensified. The world outside the car window became a blur of colors and sounds that made no sense. And then something else happened that terrified me even more. My right leg began to go numb. It started like a cramp, that familiar tingling sensation, but it quickly progressed to something much worse, complete numbness. Within minutes, I couldn't feel it at all. I would hit it with my hand, slap it hard, and it was like striking a piece of wood, no sensation whatsoever. It was as if my leg had ceased to be part of my body. Terror gripped me. My father had suffered a stroke years before, and I had been with him through that ordeal. I immediately thought I was having one too. The symptoms seemed to match: the sudden weakness, the numbness, the confusion. The sensation that I was dying became overwhelming, more real than the pain itself. It wasn't just fear, it was certainty. I was absolutely convinced that these were my final moments. I only stayed conscious because of the pain. The agony was so intense it wouldn't let me pass out. It kept me in that horrible state of awareness, trapped between consciousness and oblivion. When we finally arrived at the hospital after what felt like hours, I practically jumped out of the car, or rather, I tried to. My useless leg wouldn't cooperate. I ended up hopping on one foot toward the emergency room entrance, dragging the other leg behind me like dead weight, my wife supporting me on one side. The emergency room staff didn't take me seriously at first. Looking back, I understand. Emergency rooms see dozens of people every day claiming they're dying. They took their time, asked me to fill out forms, started routine procedures. Meanwhile, I was screaming in agony, doubled over on a gurney, feeling like my chest was being ripped open. The pain was indescribable. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced, not like a muscle pain, not like a headache, but something deep and visceral, as if my very essence was being torn apart. For 15 or 20 minutes, the staff would come by and ask me to please stop screaming. "Sir, you need to calm down," they'd say. "We're doing what we can." But I couldn't calm down. I had what felt like a knife lodged in my chest, as if someone was slowly cutting me open from the inside, and the sensation wouldn't stop. I couldn't control the screams. They were involuntary, primal responses to pain that was beyond my ability to endure silently. Finally, I felt an overwhelming urge to vomit. I managed to get to the bathroom and I literally threw up everything in my stomach. And the moment I did that, something strange happened. I felt relief. A sudden, unexpected relief. The crushing pain in my chest began to subside. It was like someone had finally pulled that imaginary knife out. I was able to breathe more deeply. The tension in my body started to release. I went back to the examination room, still weak and shaking but no longer in that excruciating pain. The doctors looked at me, ran a few more basic tests and came to a conclusion that, in retrospect, was dangerously wrong. They decided I had experienced a hysterical attack, a panic attack caused by stress and nerves. Nothing more than that. It's just nervousness, they told me with dismissive certainty. You need to go home and rest. So that's what I did. The trip was over before it had really begun. I went back to the apartment where I lived at the time, exhausted, confused, but grateful that the pain had stopped. When I tried to lie down in bed that night, though, I discovered something disturbing. I couldn't sleep lying flat. Every time I put my head on the pillow, I could literally feel and hear the blood flowing through my body. It made a whooshing sound like rushing water through pipes, a strong rhythmic whoosh 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 that was impossible to ignore. It was a heart murmur, though I didn't know that at the time. The sound was so loud, so intrusive that I couldn't relax. I can't do this, I told my wife. I can't lie down like this. So I moved to an armchair, propped myself up in a semi-reclined position, and that's how I managed to fall asleep, utterly exhausted from the ordeal. The next day was Saturday. We changed our plans and decided to go to Iberpura Park instead, to relax and get some fresh air. There's a large green area there called Peace Park, beautiful and tranquil. But I felt terrible. I was constantly exhausted as if I'd run a marathon. I literally dragged myself to the park, each step requiring conscious effort. We sat in the sun and I tried to rest, but I knew something was still very wrong. I'm not okay yet, I told my wife. Something's still not right. Sunday I spent resting at home. By Monday morning I was feeling slightly better, or at least more functional. At that time I lived near Trianon Park on Alameda Jahu, and my routine was to walk my wife to her work on Minister Rocha Azevedo Street, just 2 blocks away, and then continue on foot to my own office in the Paulista Avenue area. That morning I thought, I'm feeling lighter. I'll walk her to work and then I'll stop by the hospital nearby, 9 de Julho Hospital, just to check what's going on because this isn't normal. When I arrived at 9 de Julho Hospital and presented my insurance information, the receptionist gave me unfortunate news. I'm sorry, sir, but your plan doesn't cover this facility anymore. It was recently removed from our network. It was one of those bureaucratic nightmares. Technically I had access to the hospital for scheduled procedures, but not for emergency care. I couldn't use their urgent care services. Okay, no problem, I said, trying to stay calm despite my growing worry. I'll walk to Santa Catarina Hospital. And that's what I did. I walked almost a full kilometer, slowly, deliberately, taking it one step at a time, feeling every movement of my body, listening to that strange whooshing in my ears. When I arrived at Santa Catarina Hospital, which I now jokingly call my second home, the staff immediately took me seriously. They checked my blood pressure and I explained everything that had happened. They had me wait and they began running a battery of tests. This was early morning between 8 and 10 a.m. After several initial examinations, a doctor came to me and said, "Look, we're not entirely sure what's going on with you. Are you in a hurry?" "No," I replied. "My time is yours. Find out what's wrong." And so they did more tests. Many more tests. What they discovered was puzzling. Every time they took my blood pressure they got different readings. My right arm might show 150 over 120. My left arm would read 180 over 110. My legs showed completely different pressures again. Nothing made sense. The numbers were all over the place, which is not normal. Blood pressure should be relatively consistent throughout the body. Eventually, my wife arrived at the hospital, and by that time, the doctors had decided they needed to move me to the semi-intensive care unit to conduct more specialized tests. "We need to do an exam that requires sedation," they explained. "It's a transesophageal ultrasound. You'll need to swallow the equipment, so we'll need to sedate you for the procedure." Okay, I agreed. Let's do it. The doctors were honest with me. If this exam doesn't show anything, then you're just physiologically different from most people, and that's fine. But we need to check. They performed the exam and what they found changed everything. I had a type 1 aortic dissection. Let me explain what that means because it's crucial to understanding what happened next. The aorta is the main artery coming from your heart. It's the highway for your blood. The wall of an artery has layers, and normally if it ruptures, it bursts open like a hose splitting, which would mean instant death. But in my case, it had torn parallel to what they call the true lumen, the actual channel where blood flows. Instead of bursting outward, the tear had created a second channel, a false lumen, running parallel to the original. Think of it like a highway that suddenly splits into two lanes within the same space. Blood was flowing through both channels, but one was never meant to be there. The moment the doctor identified this during the ultrasound while I was sedated, he immediately called for a surgical team. This was a life-threatening emergency. Later, I learned that I had a congenital condition. My arterial walls were slightly thinner than normal, which, combined with a sudden spike in blood pressure, had caused this catastrophic tear. The pain I'd felt on Friday, the numbness in my leg, the strange whooshing sound, all of it made sense now. I was rushed directly into surgery. I didn't have time to process what was happening, to say proper goodbyes, to prepare myself mentally. One moment I was sedated for the ultrasound, and the next I was being prepped for emergency open-heart surgery. And this is where my near-death experience truly begins. Here's what I remember, and I want to be very clear. What I'm about to tell you defies conventional explanation. I don't fully understand it myself, and I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm simply reporting what I experienced as accurately as I can. The anesthesia they gave me for the surgery didn't work the way it should have. Or rather, it worked on my body but not on my mind. My body was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a finger, couldn't open my eyes, couldn't speak. But I was conscious. Fully, terrifyingly conscious. I could hear everything happening around me. I heard the surgical team preparing me for the operation. I heard them shaving my entire body, which is standard procedure for major surgery. I heard them discussing me in clinical terms, and this is what terrified me most. I heard someone say, "This one's basically dead." This body? They were referring to me as a body, as if I was already gone, and I was lying there screaming internally, "I'm alive. I'm awake. I can hear you." But no sound came out. I was completely trapped inside my paralyzed body, aware of everything, feeling the sensations of being moved and positioned, but unable to communicate. It was like being buried alive, but worse because I knew what was coming. They were about to cut open my chest while I was fully conscious. The panic was indescribable. How am I going to endure this? I thought. How can I survive a surgery where they open my chest while I'm aware of everything? I could imagine the scalpel cutting through my skin, the saw cutting through my sternum, and the thought was unbearable. But then I remembered something. Years before, I had taken a course on astral projection, out-of-body experiences. I had studied different techniques for consciousness exploration, though I'd never successfully achieved a full projection before. In that moment of absolute terror, trapped in my paralyzed body, I thought, I have this resource. I can try to leave my body. I have to get out of here. And remarkably, impossibly, I did. I can't explain the mechanism. I don't know if it was a genuine astral projection, a neurological phenomenon caused by the anesthesia and stress, or something else entirely. But I left my physical body. The experience was unlike anything I'd ever felt. One moment I was trapped in that surgical theater, paralyzed and terrified, and the next moment I was somewhere else entirely. Where I went first was strange and unexpected. I found myself in what appeared to be another operating room. I was lying on a surgical table, looking up, and I could see a medical team standing around me, looking down. But they were completely still, frozen like statues. The room was bathed in bright light from above, so bright that I couldn't make out their faces clearly. Everything was silent and motionless. I remember thinking, aren't they going to start the surgery? Why is everyone just standing there? And then, without anyone's mouth moving, I heard a response in my mind. Who says we're standing still? We're doing the surgery right now. We're operating on you. The communication was entirely telepathic. I realized with a start that I wasn't speaking out loud either. I was thinking, and they were hearing my thoughts and responding the same way. One of them communicated, "We don't need to talk here. We're operating on you here," but with their hands down there. I understood then that I was experiencing two realities simultaneously. There was a parallel surgical team working on another plane of existence, guiding the physical surgeons in the operating room where my body lay. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't claim to understand it. But that's what I experienced, two surgical procedures happening at once, in different dimensions or states of reality. Then something shifted. I remember it as a kind of rupture, a sudden change. I began to wake up, but not in the operating room. I started to awaken in a completely different place, a place I recognized. I found myself in my father-in-law's beach house in São Sebastião, about 200 kilometers from the hospital. Specifically, I was in his bedroom lying in bed facing the wall. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The antique colonial-style arched door from the old Des Oiseaux school, the preserved green area outside with its 18,000 square meters of Atlantic forest. Every detail was perfect. I began to wake up to the sounds of nature. Birds singing, the rustle of leaves, the distant sound of a river or stream. And I heard voices. People talking, saying, "He's waking up. Oh my God, he's waking up." There was a celebration happening, joy and excitement because I was regaining consciousness in this place. The strangest part was that until this moment, I had been feeling anxious and frightened, that residual terror from the operating room. But here, in this place, I felt completely different. I felt calm, peaceful. The sensation was one of total peace, of perfect equilibrium. I felt like I was connecting to something greater than myself, something vast and all-encompassing. I could feel sensations returning to me one by one. I felt intense light even though my eyes were closed, a luminosity that seemed to come from within and without simultaneously. I felt warmth, like the sun beating down on me, though I knew logically that the sun didn't shine into that particular room from that angle. The warmth was different, it was comforting, all-embracing. I felt completely whole, completely understood. I had what I can only describe as perfect knowledge of why I was there, what had happened to me and what it all meant. It was as if I had connected to a universal consciousness, and in that connection, everything made sense. There was no confusion, no fear, just absolute clarity and understanding. Then came the smell, the scent of forest, of vegetation, of earth and life. All my senses were returning, becoming sharper and more vivid than they'd ever been in my physical life. I was in another dimension, another reality, but it felt as real as the world I'd left behind. Maybe more real. As I lay there in this state of bliss, experiencing this profound sense of coming home, I began to want to turn around. Behind me, in the direction of that beautiful arched doorway, was where all the joy and celebration seemed to be coming from. I wanted to see what was there, who was there, what that incredible light and warmth were. But then a voice spoke to me. Not telepathically this time, but as a clear, distinct voice. "If you look back there, if you go toward that, you won't be able to return." I paused, suddenly uncertain. That's not right, I thought. This isn't how it's supposed to be. But at the same time, there was such happiness around me. Such celebration. I could hear familiar voices, 2 or 3 voices I recognized as belonging to people I had known in life, people who had died years before. One voice in particular stood out, a childhood friend who had passed away. He was the most enthusiastic, saying things like, "This is wonderful. He's coming. He's finally here." The recognition was instant and certain. I knew these voices. I knew these people. But something inside me resisted. "This isn't my time," I said firmly. "It's not right. It's not my moment to be here." And I began to consciously try to turn away from that beautiful light and warmth, to lie back down, to return. The voices behind me expressed shock and disappointment. "Wait, he doesn't want to come? He's choosing to go back? That's not possible. Why would he want to return?" There was genuine perplexity in their tone, as if my choice was incomprehensible to them. Then another voice spoke, different from the first one, perhaps the same presence or perhaps another, I couldn't tell. "If you go back, you won't have the life you had before. You'll have pain. You'll have constant pain, constant difficulties. It won't be like it is here." But I was resolute. No, I need to go back. I have to return. And as I made that choice, as I actively chose to return to life, I closed my eyes in that dimension, and the voices began to fade slowly, growing quieter and more distant, receding into the background until I could no longer hear them. What happened next was the most terrifying part of my entire experience. I found myself in a completely different place, a dark place. Not just physically dark, but spiritually, emotionally dark. It was oppressive, heavy, suffocating. I couldn't see clearly. There were shapes moving in the darkness, shadows, figures, presences. I felt them more than saw them, and what I felt from them was decidedly not good. I'm not a religious person in the conventional sense. I study various religions and spiritual traditions, but I don't subscribe to any particular doctrine. But in that dark place, I understood viscerally what people mean when they talk about negative energy, about malevolent forces. These shadows, these presences, they didn't want me to leave. They wanted to keep me there. I began to argue with them, to plead my case. "I'm not supposed to be here," I said. "I haven't done anything to deserve this. I'm here by mistake. It's not fair for me to be in this place because I have so much left to do, so much left to give." The voices, or presence or whatever they were, responded, "You're here now. You're going to stay. They tried to hold me there to prevent my return. And then they said something very specific, very clear. He can't go back because he already knows too much. That statement created an impasse. How could I return if I had seen these other dimensions, if I had experienced these other realities? The knowledge I now possessed, wasn't that a problem? Wasn't that a barrier to my return? Then I heard another voice, possibly the same benevolent presence from before, saying, "No, it's okay. He'll forget." And that created an argument among these various presences, a debate about whether I could return and whether I would retain my memories. I remember thinking to myself, almost with amusement despite the terror of the situation, they don't know me very well. I have an excellent memory. I remember everything. But even as I thought that, I felt the uncertainty. Would I remember? Would they allow me to remember? In that moment, facing this impasse, unable to convince these dark presences through argument alone, I did something I hadn't done in years. I surrendered. I let go of my will, my insistence, my demands. I said, not out loud but with my entire being, if it's meant for me to return, let it be God's will. If it's God's decision, I'll go back. If it's not, I accept that. I'm not, as I said, a conventionally religious person. I don't attend church regularly. I study various spiritual traditions without committing fully to any single path. But in that moment I invoked the divine. I surrendered to a higher power, to whatever force governs life and death, existence and non-existence. And the moment I did that, everything changed. Those dark shadows, those oppressive presences, that heavy, crushing sensation of malevolence, it all dissolved. It literally dissolved like dust, like smoke dissipating in the wind. The darkness lifted. I felt that calm again, that peace, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to return. Not because I had argued my way back, not because I had convinced anyone, but because it was simply what was meant to be. You're going back, I felt, because it's the will. Not your will, not their will, but the will. I have no clear sense of how long all of this took. Time had no meaning in these places. It could have been minutes, hours, or seconds. The concept of duration simply didn't apply. The next thing I remember clearly, consciously, in the physical world, was waking up in the ICU. I opened my eyes and thought, what am I doing here? I had gone in for an examination, a simple ultrasound, and now I was lying in intensive care with a thick bandage across my chest, a drainage tube coming out from under my ribs, connected to machines I didn't recognize. I was confused, disoriented, and incredibly drowsy. The anesthesia was still wearing off. I would drift in and out of consciousness, waking for a few minutes, then falling back asleep. People came to visit, my wife, family members, friends, but I had the strangest sensation. I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. I wasn't sure if I was in this world or still in that other place or perhaps somewhere in between. It was like a Kafkaesque experience, I told someone later. Like Kafka's Metamorphosis. But instead of asking, am I a man who thinks he's an insect? I was asking, am I a living man who thinks he's dead, or am I a dead man who thinks he's alive? I genuinely couldn't tell which dimension I was in. The boundaries had become that blurred. My perception was that I was so fragile, hovering so close to that border between life and death, that I was experiencing multiple dimensions simultaneously. And I wasn't the only one who sensed this. Strange things kept happening that confirmed I was still straddling multiple realities. For example, one day while I was in the ICU, I was lying in bed, fully conscious, when I looked toward the room next to mine and saw something that should have been impossible. I saw a patient, I could tell by the hospital gown they wore, walk out of their room with a huge smile on their face saying, "Great! It's finally my turn." And they literally ran out of the ICU, moving quickly toward the exit. I stared in shock thinking, what am I seeing? What's happening? And moments later the medical team rushed into that room. The patient had just passed away. What I had witnessed was the moment of their death. I had seen their spirit, their consciousness, whatever you want to call it, leaving their body with joy and relief. This left me even more nervous and unsettled. And it wasn't the only time. I kept seeing people in my room and in the hallways, people that the nursing staff insisted weren't there. I see people constantly, I told my wife. People coming and going and nobody else sees them. The hospital staff wasn't particularly sympathetic to my concerns. Well, one nurse said with a shrug, a hospital is the most likely place to see dead people. This is where most people die after all. But these visions, these experiences were affecting me physically. The doctors noticed that whenever I became aware of these other presences, whenever I saw something that frightened me, my blood pressure would spike dangerously. And my blood pressure absolutely could not go up. That was the whole reason I was in this condition in the first place. The arterial dissection made any increase in blood pressure potentially fatal. The medical team tried everything. They monitored me constantly, adjusted my medications, tried to keep me calm. But nothing worked consistently until they noticed a pattern. Whenever my wife was with me, my blood pressure stabilized. Whenever she left, it would begin to rise again. So the doctors made an unusual decision. They told my wife, "From this moment on, you're staying here. Don't leave. We need you to remain with him." And she did. She literally camped out in my ICU room, which was highly irregular. When she absolutely had to use the restroom, she couldn't even use the facilities on the ICU floor. She had to rush downstairs to the public bathrooms and hurry back as quickly as possible. She was my anchor. My connection to this physical reality. As long as she was there, I felt grounded. I felt safe. I felt like I wouldn't slip back into that other dimension, wouldn't be pulled away by those presences that still seemed to be waiting for me. This continued for more than a month. Even when I was asleep, if she left my side, my blood pressure would fluctuate. Her presence was considered medically essential to my survival. Eventually, when I moved out of the ICU to a regular room, other family members could take shifts staying with me. My wife's cousin, her mother, friends. They all provided some comfort, but her presence had the strongest effect. She remained my primary guardian, my link to life. During this recovery period, something else strange happened that later proved significant. I was in my room, drifting in and out of sedation because the surgery had been brutal and the pain was severe. When I woke up one time, I woke up shouting, "I need ice. I need lots of ice." My mother-in-law and my wife's cousin, who were with me at that moment, looked at me in confusion. They went to the small refrigerator in the room and brought me the ice tray. I grabbed the ice and started putting it all over my body, on my chest, my arms, everywhere. More ice. I demanded. I need much more ice. If I don't get ice, I'm going to die. I need to cool my body down. They didn't understand what was happening. They thought I was delirious from the pain medication. But later, I learned the truth. During the surgery to perform the cardiopulmonary bypass procedure, they had lowered my core body temperature to 17 degrees Celsius, just above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They had literally packed my body in ice to slow down my metabolism and protect my brain during the operation. Somehow, some part of me remembered this. Even though I was supposedly unconscious during the procedure, some aspect of my consciousness had retained the memory of being frozen, and my mind was trying to recreate that protective state. It was as if my body remembered what it needed to survive. But the most important piece of information came later, when my mother-in-law pulled my wife aside and said, "He's right. When he said he died, he's telling the truth." She explained that during the surgery, after the surgical team had completed all the repairs to my aorta, after they had finished the procedure and closed everything up, they needed to restart my heart. You see, during the operation they had stopped my heart completely. The bypass machine had taken over the function of circulating my blood. But when the surgery was done, they needed to restart the engine, as they put it. They needed to make my heart beat again. And it wouldn't. They tried everything. They used the defibrillator, sending electrical shocks through my chest. Once, twice, multiple times. But my heart refused to beat. I had technically died on that operating table. My heart had stopped, and for those crucial moments I was clinically dead. That's when my journey happened. While the surgeons were frantically trying to revive me, while they were shocking my heart again and again, I was in that beach house bedroom, experiencing that overwhelming peace, hearing those voices of loved ones who had passed on, making my choice to return, facing those dark shadows, and finally surrendering to divine will. I don't know how long I was gone. Time has no meaning in those states. But eventually my heart did restart. I did come back. And when I woke up in the ICU, I wasn't the same person who had gone into surgery. The changes were profound and immediate. First, I had abilities I'd never had before. For several months after the experience, I had premonitions almost daily. I would know things before they happened. I would sense events before they occurred. This was completely new. I had never experienced anything like this before the surgery. I also became extremely sensitive to energy, to the presence of spirits or consciousness that existed on other planes. In the hospital and for months afterward, I would see people that others couldn't see. I would sense presences, feel energies, perceive dimensions of reality that had been completely invisible to me before. But perhaps the most significant change was in my understanding of existence itself. I came back with what I can only describe as knowledge, not belief but direct knowledge, that consciousness survives physical death. I don't have to believe in an afterlife anymore. I know it exists because I've been there. I've experienced it. The certainty is absolute and unshakable. I also came back with an understanding of something profound. We exist in an intermediate dimension. Earth, physical reality, it's not the highest plane of existence, but it's not the lowest either. It's in the middle, and it's subject to interference from both higher and lower dimensions. That's why you can't be completely pure and good in this world. You need some edge, some toughness to survive here. The complete purity and peace I felt in that beautiful place, it can't exist in full form here without making you extremely vulnerable. I understood that there's a delicate balance between light and darkness, between knowledge and ignorance, between elevation and degradation. We're constantly influenced by both sides, and our choices, our thoughts, our intentions determine which direction we move in. Another insight I gained was about free will and determinism. I used to think they were opposites, but now I understand they coexist. We have complete free will to make our choices, but there's a higher consciousness, call it God, call it the universe, call it source, that already knows what we're going to choose. Our choices are real and meaningful, but they exist within a larger pattern that's already understood at a higher level. I also learned about the power of thought. What we think, we attract. This isn't just positive thinking platitude. It's a fundamental law of how consciousness interacts with reality. When I was in that elevated state, what I thought would manifest. The connection between intention and manifestation was immediate and direct. Here in physical reality, it's slower, more difficult, but the principle still holds. There's one more thing I learned in that place, one more piece of knowledge that I was told I would forget but somehow retained. I was told about my son. During that experience, when I was arguing for my return, I said, I need to go back for my wife and my son. And the voice responded, you don't have a son. And I said, not yet. But I will. This was in 2008 and my wife wasn't pregnant. We wouldn't have a child for another 2 years. But somehow, in that place of perfect knowledge, I knew I would have a son. And when my wife became pregnant in 2010, when she asked, do you think it's a girl? I said with complete certainty, no, it's definitely a boy. And I was right. That knowledge had been given to me in that other dimension, and it proved true. The experience changed me in ways that are difficult to articulate. For months afterward, I was frightened of what I had seen and what I could now perceive. I deliberately closed myself off from those other dimensions because I felt too vulnerable, too open. I needed to heal physically, and the doctor said I needed to keep my blood pressure stable, which meant keeping calm. So I shut that door, consciously and firmly, to protect myself. But I also felt repulsion toward much of what this world offers. Television, news, advertisements. So much of it seemed negative, harsh, discordant. I had touched something so beautiful, so pure, so filled with love and understanding, that the contrast with everyday human existence was jarring and painful. Over time, I adapted. I learned to exist in this world again, to function here while carrying the knowledge of what lies beyond. I learned that what happened to me wasn't trauma, it was a gift. It was access to knowledge that most people don't get while they're still alive. People have asked me if my near-death experience was caused by the surgery itself, by the physical trauma, by oxygen deprivation, by the medications. And my answer is clear. No. The surgery may have been the trigger, the doorway, but what I experienced was real in its own right. It wasn't a hallucination or a dream. It was, in some fundamental way, more real than this reality we're in right now. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't pretend to understand the full mechanics of what happened to me. I think of myself as bringing back just a piece of the dinosaur skeleton. There's so much more to be filled in, so much more to understand. Each person who has one of these experiences brings back their own piece, their own perspective, and together maybe we can assemble a more complete picture. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is this: consciousness survives death. There are multiple dimensions of existence. We're not alone, we're connected to something vast and incomprehensible. Love is real and transcends death. We have more control over our reality through our thoughts and intentions than we realize. And our choices matter, profoundly and eternally. I share this story not to convince you of any particular religious or spiritual belief system. I share it because it's my truth, my experience, and it might resonate with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe you've had a similar experience and felt alone or crazy. Maybe you've lost someone and wondered if they still exist somewhere. Maybe you're afraid of death and need reassurance that it's not an ending but a transition. Whatever brings you to this story, I hope it offers you something valuable. I hope it opens your mind to possibilities beyond what we can see and measure. I hope it reminds you that you are more than just your physical body, more than just the thoughts in your head, more than just the role you play in society. You are consciousness itself, temporarily inhabiting a physical form, having a human experience in an intermediate dimension, connected always to something greater, something beautiful, something eternal. And when this life is done, when it's truly your time to go, you'll return to that greater reality, that home we all came from and will all return to eventually. That's what I learned when I died and came back. That's what I know now with absolute certainty. And that knowledge has changed everything about how I live, how I love, how I face each day with gratitude for this second chance I've been given. Thank you for listening to my story.